everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are going to be taking a look at the Blackbird Simulations T6 Texan 2. The aircraft was released for Microsoft Flight Simulator some weeks ago. It does seem to have flown a little bit under the radar, but Blackbird Simulations were kind enough to reach out to me asking whether or not I would like to take a look at the product. Military turboprop trainers are not usually my sort of thing within the sim, but Blackbird Simulations add-ons certainly are. Blackbird, or Milviz as they were formerly known, also responsible for the FG-1D Corsair and the Cessna 310R within Microsoft Flight Simulator, both add-ons that I've really enjoyed within the sim. So for our flight today, we're going to be taking the Texan on a familiarisation flight around the local area. We are currently on the ground at Beale Air Force Base. I've chosen Beale as the scenery is also available from Blackbird Simulations. We're going to be tracking out towards the north of the city of Yuma, and we'll be putting the aircraft through its paces around the Sutter Buttes. As usual, we'll be carrying out a full flight all the way through from Colin Dark right through to Shutdown, and I'll be trying to give you a comprehensive breakdown of the add-on along the way. I'm very much looking forward to seeing what the Texan has to offer, again with Blackbird's previous excellent history within the sim. Interestingly as well, Milviz actually responsible for developing the T6 Texan 2 as a training aid for the United States Air Force. So hopefully there should be some real pedigree behind this add-on, and it should make for a really enjoyable flight. As always, if you do enjoy the video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. And if you would like to help support the channel further, you can do so by becoming a channel member or patron. Okay, so this morning we find ourselves on the main apron here at Beale. And again, as discussed, it's going to be a two-ship formation flight with the Blackbird Simulations T6 Texan 2. We're heading out towards the Sutter Buttes, which, with the beautiful weather that we have here in California this morning, you can already see there off in the distance at our 2 o'clock. We've already carried out the pre-boarding checks. For our flight today, we're actually using a somewhat abbreviated third-party checklist, but it works very nicely. And of course, we'll cover off all of the pertinent items here as we go. So for the pre-startup checks, the gust lock has been removed. No sounds currently associated with the gust lock. It would be nice to see those added. Does have to be said though, overall the sound set generally on the aircraft is excellent. We'll take the battery master on, cancel the master warning and as well the master caution. Auxiliary battery can go on here as well. Down to the test panel, we'll carry out a lamp test, and as usual just working our way around the cockpit, making sure all of our lighting and indications are functioning correctly, which they are. So we can cancel the test, and again the master warning and the master caution. We'll carry out an AOA test, so firstly 3 to high. You can see there our AOA value increasing. And there's our stall warning. And 3 to low. And the AOA showing on target. Lastly, we'll carry out a fire test. It does have to be said the click spots here on the test panel are really rather fiddly. Good test there on system 1. And same there on system 2. Once again, we'll just cancel the master warning. Navigation lights are selected on. The engine cut-off paddle has been pushed, so the throttle with the power control lever is now free. Just leave that back in the cut-off position for the time being. PMU switch is set through to normal. Bus tie switch is set through to normal. The fuel balance switch is set through to auto. And the manual fuel balance switch is set through to normal. We can now close up the canopy, so we'll pull the canopy unlock release. Get the aircraft closed up. And the canopy handle in the latch position. We do have the lock position indicated. And as well we have a green indication there, so the canopy is latched and locked. Anti-collision light we'll select on here ahead of the start. Fuel boost pump is selected on, and we'll just come up here on the power control lever until we see the fuel pressure warning light extinguish. Interestingly, we have the start ready indication, still with the low fuel pressure indication. Not sure whether we should see both of those or not at the same time. My checklist might be an error, but it seems to suggest we should be able to leave the power control lever here in the start ready position with the fuel pressure warning light out. Generator master is selected on, ignition is selected on, and we'll just bring the power control lever back now into the start ready position. So again, just a master warning there for the fuel pressure. And we have start ready. For the start itself, the attitude indicator is caged. It's going to be an auto start. So we'll move the start switch into the auto start position. Okay, so we have rotation there on the prop, the ITT peaking at around 680 degrees. Oil pressure coming up, oil temperature about 33 degrees, hydraulic pressure looks good. And we should see the torque here stabilise between 5 and 8%. Just make sure here that the power control lever is now in the idle position. So we do have a good start, the engine parameters look good. We do have a starter cutout, so the start switch back in the normal position. The ignition switch as well can go back into the normal position. And the boost pump switch can go back through to ARM. We'll take the avionics master on. Oxygen supply is selected on. Nice sound effects there as well. We do have pilot breathing sounds both for the oxygen supply and as well for G effects. Lead air we'll take through to normal. Trim aid device is selected on. Air conditioning as well here we'll take on. We'll uncage the standby attitude indicator. We can set the altimeters here as well. The aerodrome elevation 113 feet. So that's going to take us a little bit of time just to scroll through. And current QNH is 2974, 113 feet. We'll set the same here as well on the standby altimeter. And we have 2974 set and cross-checked. Altimeters are set, we'll initialise the GPS. So 2974 set here as well. And we'll hit enter. We can acknowledge the nav database. And we'll just put in a very simple direct to Beale, just to give us a distance back to the field. We've got direct to Kilo Bravo Alpha Bravo. And you can see that's giving us 0.4 miles to the field on a bearing 205 currently. We'll use that later on for our return. Similarly, we'll just come in on the range here on the nav display. And we might as well tune up the Beale VOR here as well, or the TACAN in this particular case. That's on a frequency of 108.6. Now we'll just tune that across to VOR 1. So altimeters are set, GPS is set, radios have been initialised. The taxi checks will remove the ejection seat pin, as well the canopy fracture pin. Both of those are stowed. Take the taxi light on. Flaps can come through to takeoff. And we have a takeoff indication. And that is our taxi checklist complete. So for the taxi out, we'll fall in behind our wingman. We're going to be exiting the apron here at our 11 o'clock. It'll be the first right onto the main taxiway, and then first left for an intersection departure this morning off Beale's runway 15.
701, back with you in the climb up for 210. We're visual about to your left at 10 o'clock for 20 miles. With the rejoin to contact 66 Oak School 2990.
01, are you looking for more than 9K or you want just 9K?
01 will be coming out low and the last one's back in about 20 minutes probably.
Okay, so we are now lined up here on runway 15. We're going to be solo here for the takeoff. We'll formate with our wingman later on during the departure. The takeoff checks, the landing lights is selected on. We'll take the taxi light off. Probes and anti-ice we can leave off as per the checklist. It's 31 degrees on the OAT currently. Transponder is set through to out. Just carry out a quick flight control check. So there's full left, and full right, full up, full down, and full left, full right there on the rudder. The flight controls are full and free in the correct sense. Parking brake is off, so we'll just hold the aircraft here on the toe brakes, and initially coming through to 15% on the torque. Again, really like the sounds on the aircraft overall, they're very unique. There's 15%. Just checking our temperatures and pressures. All pressure looks good, same as off the hydraulic pressure. So, off the brakes, and apparently all the way through to full power here on the power control lever for the takeoff. The aircraft is initially a little bit squirrely, both on the brakes and the rudder, but once you pick up speed, things start to firm up a little bit. But easy enough to keep straight here on the centre line. Just waiting until we see 80 knots. There's 80 back on the stick. And the T6 really wanting to drop the left wing a little bit there as well during the rotation. No dead positive climb, we'll tap the brakes, bring up the gear. And just climbing away initially to 500 feet. Up through 500, we'll start to turn out towards the southwest, and for the climb here we'll come back to around 88% on the torque. Speed check, we'll bring up the flaps. And the aircraft just sinking a little bit there as we do so. So we're formating now with our wingman, he's just moving into position, he's going to be out at our 2 o'clock here for the flight today. And again, heading out towards the Sutter Buttes, which are now approaching our 2 o'clock position. So once again, making use of Airshow Assistant here for our wingman, which, as I mentioned now in many videos, is a really excellent little tool. That's a pretty cracking view there as well. Approaching 1500 feet, we'll level off at 1500 or thereabouts, so we'll come back to 80% now on the torque. The flight model of the T6 is very interesting, we'll try and talk about that of course as we go. Overall the aircraft definitely feels pretty unique in the sim. Certain characteristics feel a little bit strange to me, but that might just be the nature of the beast. I've never flown a military turboprop of course before. And you've got a huge mass up there at the front of the engine, courtesy of that propeller, so it does make for some potentially interesting handling characteristics. So first things first, we'll just get the aircraft trimmed out. A little bit of rudder trim here as well. Currently the aircraft a little bit left wing heavy. One thing for sure, you definitely get a sense of that prop here on the flight model. It really wants to pull the aircraft around. So for example, again during the takeoff, wanting to pull that left wing down quite significantly during the rotation. And same here as well. Again, currently slightly left wing heavy, but we can trim that out with a bit of rudder trim. Similarly, we'll look at it later on, but as you pull up, the aircraft will actually drop the right wing. If you push down on the stick, you'll drop the left wing. So it seems as though all of those gyroscopic forces are modelled quite nicely. It does though make the T6 a little bit of a handful actually, if you're not used to that sort of behaviour. Particularly I find during the approach. Okay, so we do now have things more or less in trim. Still just using a little bit more right rudder trim here. The aircraft still wanting to drop that left wing. Got the gear up, lights out, flaps are up. We'll leave the landing lights on since we're down at low level. And we'll just come slightly further back here on the torque, again around 80% here in the cruise. Maintaining level quite nicely.
I see is 19.6 at AR5. to get to Hilo with 7.0 or 7.1.
Copy, just keep the highest bingo in mind. I'm going to assume I got 1.8 trapped.
Okay, so approaching the Sutter Buttes, which I believe are actually a volcanic formation initially. It certainly look the part. Apparently they were lava flows that bubbled up into this small range of mountains. Anyway, we'll just enter here via the southwestern face. We'll come down towards ground level. There's a nice little road here peeling out towards the west. We'll follow that in towards the hills. One little issue I have noticed with the aircraft, you'll notice very low FPS here on the attitude indicator, the vertical speed indicator, the altimeter and the nav display currently. Don't know why, I've had that a few times in various flights. That should fix itself up at some point. Just keep an eye on things, it'll smooth out again later on. One would assume that would be a fairly easy issue for Blackbird simulations to fix up. Anyway, as I say, we'll head down towards the ground, so approaching 1,000 feet. And we'll just leave ourselves, for now, up to around 80% on the torque. Initially we'll just have some fun down here at low level, and then we'll start to manoeuvre the aircraft a little bit more aggressively as we continue on with the sequence. We'll see how she handles in the stall, back at low speed. As well, we'll just probably carry out a couple of fairly simple aerobatic manoeuvres. So I'm sure I've mentioned in previous videos, just pausing there, you can see things have smoothed out now with the gauges once again. So as I was saying, I have mentioned in previous videos, military turboprops are not usually my type of aircraft in the sim, but you can have some real fun with them. And certainly if you're going to get a military turboprop within Microsoft Flight Simulator, the T6 at the moment is the one to get. Leaps and bounds ahead of the competition in terms of fidelity and complexity. We'll just carry out somewhat of a lazy right-hand wing over here to bring us in around the back of the hills. Tracking out towards the north. Currently about 19 miles out from Beale. And the GPS there showing us on a bearing of 088 back towards the field. We'll roll out to the left, just cutting across the side of the hill. Yeah, overall really good fun to fly. Again, the flight model does feel very unique. It certainly feels highly customised. At times, as I mentioned, that to me does give the aircraft some fairly unique handling characteristics. And I do want to stress, unique does not necessarily mean bad. I can't really tell you just how accurate the flight model is, but at times the T6 does feel a little bit tentative on the controls. Obviously most aircraft within the sim are overly sensitive, certainly not the case with the T6. It does have its moments of sensitivity, but if anything at times it feels almost as though there's a little bit of a gap between me moving my controls and actually seeing an input on the aircraft. You'll notice that particularly at low speeds. At high speeds the aircraft handles pretty nicely, very precise, very sharp on the controls as you might imagine. Certainly you do need significant inputs to see a response from the T6, which is a little bit more true to life. Once we start to manoeuvre a little bit more, I'll show you some of those peculiar tendencies that I mentioned as well, and I do believe a lot of those probably are true to life. Again, with that prop being modelled, I'm sure we're using the full prop modelling available within Microsoft Flight Simulator here on the aircraft. That really does show later on. We'll come back up to 88% now on the torque. Start building up a little bit of speed. We'll put the aircraft through a few manoeuvres, so for example, as I said, we'll do a loop. We'll carry out a stall here as well. So first things first, we'll just bring the speed back. Again, at high speeds, so they're between about 180 and 220 knots. The aircraft, a real joy to fly. Going back through 140, and as I said, needing quite a bit more control input now. Although it is worth noting, so I'm actually currently putting in stick deflection. You can see the animator stick there barely moving at all. That could be a calibration issue on my end. And in fact, going off the animator stick there, I would say the aircraft response is very reasonable overall. So in terms of me mentioning a gate between my control movements and the aircraft, that probably does come down to the controls that I run, as I mentioned. Certainly though, now the speed is coming back, the aircraft feeling rather more wallowy on the controls. And definitely wanting to drop that left wing at this point. Low speed, high power. There's the stall warning. We do still have aileron authority at the moment. We'll keep the speed coming back through 80 knots. See how long we can keep the aircraft wings level. They've got quite a bit of right aileron now, a little bit of right rudder, dropping the right wing. We'll keep fully back on the stick. The aircraft, as you saw there, did drop a wing, but it didn't want to go into a spin even with the stick kept fully back. So not much of a tendency here for the T6 to spin. I don't know how accurate that is to the real aircraft. Back up to 88%, keeping the speed just through 4,000. We'll come away from the high terrain here for our loop. Okay, so we'll roll into the entry of our loop, obviously picking up some speed here before we come back on the stick. So through 180 knots, we'll get the speed up to around 240, 250. So there's 3,000 feet and 250 knots. You do have to be quite aggressive here in your manoeuvring. That speaks to what I was mentioning earlier on. Going back on the stick really wants to pull that right wing down. As I was starting to say, you do have to enter the loop quite aggressively. You do bleed off speed fairly quickly here during the manoeuvring. Yeah, just coming over the top, and as that speed bleeds off again, wanting to drop that left wing. So again, the T6 actually quite a challenge to fly accurately, to fly nicely, with that big old prop up the front, really pulling the aircraft around at its will during high power settings. Up to around 280 knots, just to demonstrate again those prop forces. So we're high speed currently, 220, wings level. I'll just pull directly back on the stick, not putting in any aileron input. And you can see there the aircraft has a natural tendency to roll out to the right. Similarly, we do a bit of a pushover. The aircraft there has a natural tendency to want to roll slightly out to the left. So once more, very interesting handling characteristics overall. Okay, the field now on a bearing of 080. We'll just crank the aircraft around, see what sort of turn rate we get. About half back on the stick currently. And speed bleeding off through 140. Just come all the way back on the stick again, see if we can induce some sort of a spin. The aircraft really bogging down now as that speed bleeds off. Back to 100 knots. So overall the T6 fairly placid actually, quite hard to get the aircraft to spin, very easy to recover as well. In the stall here, and we're basically just mushing the nose down. Quite a high rate of descent. But again, overall pretty placid behaviour, which one may well expect from a training aircraft. Hopefully at least that's given you a decent demonstration of the T6's flight model and capabilities, and you can decide for yourselves how accurate or not that behaviour may be. Anyway, we'll come back onto a bearing of 080. You can see there the magenta marker is Beale Air Force Base, about 20 miles to run to get ourselves back home. Bring the torque back to about 80% once again. And showing about 16 miles to the field, we're doing about 3 miles a minute, so about 5 minutes to run to get ourselves back home. In the meantime, I think that would be a great opportunity here to take a look at the onboard tablet. We'll just briefly run through those functionalities on the way back towards Beale. On arrival, we'll fly overhead the field, we'll break off for a left-hand entry back onto runway 15.
Okay, heading 030. Okay, drop, check 301, 750, 6.3 Gs.
2730, 6.0 Gs.
Phaser 2, go fighting wings, out.
So, as with previous Blackbird or Milviz products, the aircraft comes with a very nice, very comprehensive onboard tablet with various options available. We'll briefly run through all of those. Firstly, we have the General tab. Here we can configure the aircraft in various states, so ready to fly, cold and dark. We can charge the batteries, clear all failures. As well, we can install the external ground fixtures and fittings, so you've already seen those, the chocks, the pins and covers. We also have an external power cart available. We can add or remove student and instructor pilot models. And as well, we can have the rear pilot configure the rear cockpit, which is a really nice feature. As well, you can choose whether or not the cockpit auto-configures when you switch between seats. So currently, as you can see, I have that in auto, but you can choose whether or not you want the front or rear displays. You can only have one at a time, presumably to save on FPS. The other tab of the aircraft config is weight and balance, and here we can adjust the student, instructor and baggage weights. We can also change out between summer and winter gear carrying a slightly higher weight penalty. As well, we can set the onboard fuel, just currently coming through about 6,100 pounds, and we've got about 850 pounds of fuel on board. In terms of settings, various GPS options there. Haven't really worked through those myself, but you can choose the GPS database. So we have World, USA, Americas, Atlantic, Pacific. As well, we can choose our GPS software. As well, we have a couple of additional aircraft systems, including airshow smoke, which is a nice feature. And as discussed, you also get nice included sounds for pilot breathing and breathing during high G maneuvers. You can adjust as well the trim sensitivity settings, which is really nice. By default, I would say the trims on the aircraft are not particularly sensitive. You can also set up custom bindings for various aircraft controls. I haven't set up any myself, but again, really nice feature to have. Makes the aircraft a little bit more user-friendly. And lastly, in terms of failures, the aircraft does come with a comprehensive set of failure options, including both realistic and timed failures. You can also check the aircraft status. You can choose config as well, so we have an easy config. Currently we're using that for the video. We also have max realism, of course inducing more failures based on aircraft stress, aircraft usage. We also have the option for random failures, all the way through from no failures to a realistic mean time between failure, and then simulation of a poorly maintained aircraft. As well, you can have stress-based damage for landing gear, engine systems, modelled bird strikes as well, which is a really nice feature, also icing, and as well modelled fuel sloshing. So all in all, once again, a really nice feature set, the T6, as I mentioned earlier on, without a doubt, the most realistic and comprehensive military turboprop currently available within the sim.
This is Orca 77, KC-10, in Balance, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry about that, Orca. 2 F-16s going into Sidewalk. Any chance of you quick dry hookup with you? I don't know if you have chicks to tow you.
And confirm it's Surf 31.
Hearing Uniform Romeo Foxtrot 31 Plan 2 April.
Okay, so we've just come down through 5,000 feet, approaching Beale, keeping the speed up for now. We'll just start to roll off that power. We'll maintain around 200 knots here in the descent. We've got the landing light selected on. In terms of our fuel state, we've got about 400 pounds in each main tank, burning around 600 pounds an hour. So plenty of fuel here for the approach. We'll level off at 1,600 feet, or thereabouts. That'll put us 1,500 foot above the aerodrome elevation. Now I'm just drawing overhead the runway. Again, braking off to the left for a left-hand downwind back onto runway 15. As mentioned earlier, the T6 is a really tricky little aircraft to get a nice smooth landing out of. Certainly presents a really nice challenge. Again, I don't know how true to life or not that is of the actual aircraft. I find keeping a little bit of power on during the flare tends to help, so we'll try and do that here for the approach. Okay, speed's rolling off. Below 160 knots we can come through to take off flaps, but we'll just hold the flaps momentarily longer. Just come overhead the runway. So again, Beale is another scenery from Blackbird Simulations. Overall a really nice piece of scenery, I have to say. I seem to recall someone recently announced they're going to be doing a U2 for the sim, so that'll be a brilliant piece of scenery to have once the aircraft releases. I'm really looking forward to the U2. Never flown one in the sim before. Should be a really interesting prospect for Microsoft Flight Simulator. Okay, so levelling off. And below 160 we'll take takeoff flat. Maintaining around 20% for now on the torque. That should allow that speed to slowly reduce further. Below 150 we can take the gear down, so we get on the speed, we'll take the gear down. And for now we'll come through to about 40% on the torque to maintain the speed. Okay, so again needing quite a bit of trim now, both on the elevator and on the rudder. We'll just wait there until the threshold's in a 45-degree position off the aircraft, and then we'll turn in onto base. Okay, that should do us. Really interesting scenery as well here out towards the north of Beale. Of course, as well, at some point Blackbird Simulations are going to be the team giving us the SR-71, so really looking forward to having that in the sim. So, speed limit for landing flap is 110 knots. We'll continue reducing the power here and let that speed roll off. Low 110, so we'll come through to landing flap. And I find back up to around 30% now on the torque. Holds the speed pretty nicely. We're looking for 90 knots here down the approach. And you can see there we are on our AOA target. For anyone that's not familiar, that's the little amber donut there off the left of the coaming. Okay, so we have gear down, 3 greens, flaps are set through to landing. Start coming up on the power now to maintain the speed. And again, all the while just continuing to trim. A little bit high there on the pappies. As I mentioned, very tricky to get a nice touchdown out of the T6, so we'll just hold a little bit of power during the flare. And avoiding the brakes as well. The brakes are very squirrely at high speed with the Texan. Still a little bit high, so we'll just reduce that power. Definitely one of the more challenging aircraft to fly in the sim, or at least to fly well. They're looking a little bit better now in terms of our profile, just getting a touch slow, so feeding in some power. And slightly out to the left of the centre line, but correcting for that. Nose just wanting to pitch up there as we come over the thresholds. Get into the flare, slowly cutting that power. There's touchdown. And very gentle here on the rudder as well. Again, the aircraft at high speed, pretty squirrely on the ground. So we'll just let that speed bleed off as we roll through. And we can take the brakes later on to vacate off to the left. Okay, so we just vacated runway 15, we'll take the next right and then the next left back in towards the apron. Transponder can go off, or back into standby. Brake heats are off, we'll take the landing lights off, and no need for the taxi light here, it's going to be a very short stint back in towards the apron. So we'll just go and get ourselves parked up back in front of the hangar, we'll get the aircraft shut down. And as usual, just to finish up the video, we'll run through my overall thoughts and opinions on what I think of the Blackbird Simulations T6 Texan 2. Again, the U2, a really interesting aircraft, can't wait to see that in the sim. Okay, so onto the brakes. Swing the aircraft around. The aircraft does require a lot of power initially to get moving, but once you have, overall I think that the T6's ground handling is very nice. We'll take the park brake on. For the shutdown checks, the park brake is set, the flaps, we'll select those up and just wait for those to retract. And we have flaps up, a little bit jumpy there in terms of the movement. I don't know, again, how accurate or not that is to the real world aircraft. We'll hit the engine cutoff. And of course, the master warning there as we do so. Lost the fuel pressure, the O-bogs and the generator, as well the oil pressure now. So again, just cancelling the master warning and the master caution. Once again, we'll open up the canopy. Just stow the pins here as well for the seat and the canopy. So we'll set that through to unlock. In terms of the lights, we'll take the anti-collision light off. Landing light and taxi lights are off. We'll leave the nav lights on. Trim device is selected off. Bleed air inflow is selected off. Oxygen supply is off. Avionics master is off. PMU is off. And again, just cancelling the master warning and the master caution. Master generator is off. Same as well for the auxiliary battery. And as well for the master battery. Lastly, we'll just reinstall the gust lock. And that is our shutdown checklist complete. So there you go. I do hope you enjoyed our outing in the Blackbird Simulations T6 Texan 2. As promised, we'll just finish up the video with a breakdown of what I think on the add-on. We'll cover off a few points in a bit more detail than we have throughout the flight. Starting with the texturing and the modelling, I think both of those speak for themselves. Blackbird have certainly produced a visually stunning rendition of the T6. Modelling detail is pretty exacting, and the texturing as well, very nice. I have to say my favourite texturing that I've seen from Blackbird Simulations to date. The textures look that much more photorealistic than some of their previous efforts, where I've critiqued them for having a slightly more painted facade to them. But once more in this case, I do think that the textures look that much more realistic, and of course therefore make the aircraft that much more immersive. As far as the flight model of the aircraft goes, that is definitely the hardest area here for me to pin down and really describe to you what I experienced during the flight itself. Without a doubt, as we discussed during the sortie, the flight model is certainly very customised and does feel very unique within the sim. Again, as well, a lot of the nice, more unique handling characteristics of the aircraft have been modelled, and you do feel the effects. So, for example, again, that massive prop spinning up at the front really does pull the T6 around. You notice that with changes in power, changes in airspeed, of course, changes in trim. I think the easiest way to try and describe the flight model to you is to talk you through things phase by phase and discuss in a little bit more detail what I found throughout the flight. So starting with the taxi, initially a lot of power needed there to get the aircraft moving, I suspect unrealistically so, but once you have the aircraft on the roll, it does taxi rather nicely in terms of speed as well as controllability on the ground. During the takeoff, the aircraft is initially a little bit stabby on the brakes, a little bit sensitive on the rudder. As the speed picks up, at least on the rudder, things do firm out quite a bit, and the aircraft does become easy enough to control during the takeoff. During the rotation, there is a significant tendency for the left wing to drop, again I assume as a result of all of those prop forces. And then when it comes to low speed flight, which is really the only area of the flight model to me that felt a little bit unusual, at low speed both the controls and the trims do feel quite vague. Of course you would expect lower control responses at lower speeds, but to me it almost feels as though you're suggesting where you want the aircraft to go as opposed to actually flying it. That does make the T6 quite tricky to handle accurately at low speed. I found myself really gripping up on the controls at certain points throughout the flight. That being said, whilst the aircraft does feel like it needs a lot of control input from the pilot, in actuality I found I could release the controls and the T6 was fairly stable. As I mentioned during the flight though, the best way I could describe the aircraft's low speed handling characteristics was it feels as though there's almost a dead zone between my control inputs and the aircraft control inputs. I am running a slight control curve within the sim, but only the default curves that are put in by Microsoft themselves. So that may account for some of the low speed handling, and again that could well be dialed out using the sensitivity settings within MSFS. This does also mean that, as we mentioned, the Texan can be a real handful during the approach and the landing. Again, it's actually quite tricky to get a nice landing out of the T6. So, of course, I don't know how accurate those behaviours are versus the real-world aircraft, but certainly within the sim, the T6 is not an aircraft that you can fly with your fingertips at low speed. High speed, however, the aircraft is a real joy to fly, very easy on the controls, very manoeuvrable as you might expect. Though again, as my rather poor attempt at a loop will demonstrate, it is quite hard to fly the aircraft accurately with all of those prop effects modelled. So coming up and down on the power, as well as physically manoeuvring the aircraft, will all have you suffering from those prop effects. Of course though, that's what we all want to see. This does appear to be a highly customised and presumably fairly accurate flight model. Again, Milviz, the other division of Blackbird Simulations, have previously developed the T-6 for the United States Air Force, used in their training programs, so you would have to assume that the flight model does have a weight of data and accuracy behind it. The same with the aircraft systems. Again, this T-6 does have the lineage of a real-world training tool behind it, so systems overall seem to be very accurate. Do bear in mind that, as we saw from the tablet, we did have all of the failure functionality turned off today, but you can certainly damage the engine, damage the aircraft. There are a whole host of systems failures, both programmable and random. As well, many of the aircraft failures do also have associated visual effects, so for example you will see flames from the engine. You can also bend and break the prop. In summary, so far as the aircraft systems go, more or less everything seemed to be clickable in the cockpit. The GPS there, for example, is a one-to-one rendition of the real-world unit. And all of the cockpit controls, including the circuit breakers, seem to have associated systems, effects and outcomes. In terms of sounds, I think that's one area where the aircraft really shines. Again, this is a fully custom sound set. Internally, minus a very small number of exceptions, so again, for example, the gust lock not having any sounds associated with it, the sound set is very immersive and very well done. I really like the background whine that you hear. That does seem to be true to life of the T-6, although perhaps a little bit higher pitched in the real aircraft. Of course, though, some of that may come down to recording methods and hardware versus what I have here in the sim. But at any rate, overall I find the internal sound set to be very immersive. Externally, the aircraft does sound pretty good as well, although perhaps just lacking a little bit in range at different power settings. And as well, during the startup, the transition through in terms of prop noise was a little bit abrupt. There didn't really seem to be any blade slapping sound as the prop spooled up, and then all of a sudden you hear the prop throughout the sequence. Obviously though, nitpicking on that one, sounds do always seem to divide the audience, but I think that the T-6 has a very nice custom and very immersive sound set. In terms of product extras, again, an excellent offering from Blackbird Simulations. Lots of nice additional features. We've seen the external fixtures and fittings, for example the chocks, the covers, the external ground cart. As well, custom pilot models, custom animated. They also have animated visors, animated oxygen mask, dependent on the aircraft system selection. The onboard tablet as well, giving a lot of customization options. We talked through those during the flight, and again as well you get the custom failure system. I suppose one feature that would be nice to have on the tablet that I didn't see, there's no autopilot on the aircraft so far as I'm aware, so it would be nice to have perhaps a custom autopilot option available via the tablet. In terms of liveries included, there are a significant number of very nicely done military liveries, mostly of course focusing around the United States Air Force and the US Navy. You do as well also get some other military liveries though, for example the Hellenic Air Force, the Royal New Zealand Air Force, the Royal Canadian Air Force. One livery option which, as a Brit, I did feel was sorely missing, no RAF liveries currently, which was a little bit surprising. So far as the included documentation goes, overall very nice. Included is a 114-page manual which includes lots of detail about the aircraft systems, aircraft operation, as well the add-on setup. My only minor gripe with the manual, and this is really just personal preference, but developers, if you are going to give us checklists included in the manual, then personally I much prefer to see them written out in a standard checklist format as opposed to long form. Otherwise it is quite hard to follow through in real time with a flight like this, and hence using the third-party checklist for the flight today. On the subject of checklist, it's also worth noting that the aircraft does come with the in-sim checklist functionality fleshed out, so you do have checklists available within the sim. Lastly, in terms of FPS, as far as I could tell, the T-6 only costing me a few frames per second. I was getting about 57 FPS with the Texan, versus 60 plus with the default Cessna 152, of course under the same circumstances. In summary then, minus a couple of questions regarding the flight model, which really only a real-world Texan pilot's going to be able to clarify. The Blackbird Simulations T-6 is another excellent effort from the team, without a doubt their best and most highly accurate add-on for Microsoft Flight Simulator to date. The aircraft looks the part, sounds the part, broadly seems to fly the part, and something which is often very difficult to recreate in the sim, really seems to feel the part as well. The add-on feels very substantial and has a real solid quality to it. Again, I'm not typically one for military turboprop trainers within the sim, but if you do want one for Microsoft Flight Simulator, then without a doubt, at the moment, the Blackbird Simulations T-6 Texan 2 is the one to get. Once more, I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider giving it a like. If you want to see more content from the channel, then please do consider subscribing as well. And again, if you would like to help support the channel further, you can do so by becoming a channel member or patron, and I'll leave a link to both of those down in the video description below. As always, a very big thank you to my channel members and patrons for all of your support, and once more a very big thank you as well to Blackbird Simulations for letting us take a look at the aircraft. I do hope that all of you are having a great day wherever you are. Take really good care, and I will see you all again soon.